Today, we are talking about the sociological imagination. The last video that you probably watched was the first day of class intro video. If you haven't watched that video, I would highly suggest you do that first before watching this video, just so that you have an idea of how the class is going to be laid out. Key information about the class, pretty much any questions that you would have will be in that video and on the syllabus. Okay. So yeah, just make sure you watch that video first before you go here. If you have any questions that you need to just talk to me directly, you can always email me, or you can go to the syllabus, and there you'll see my office hours, and you can just click on the Zoom link for the office hours. I'll be right there, and we can talk in, we can talk in real time. It won't be in person, but it'll be in real time. If you have any additional questions, or if there's anything that I can do to help you understand how the class flows, and anything I can do to make you more comfortable while you're taking this class, and you're just kind of learning how things are flowing. And so for those who have not taken any sociology courses, or who are not majors in sociology, this is just kind of a quick overview. For those who've taken either this class before, well, no, if you took this class before, you might not be taking it again. But I think it was maybe another class, maybe my theory class, where I went over this same topic. So you may be getting it again. If not, if you haven't taken my class before, then this might be new to you. We're going to start off just kind of talking about the definition of sociology and what sociology is. And so I like to provide two different definitions: a very in-depth definition that gives you that historical background, as well as a much more succinct definition, to something that we can kind of come away with, and then more than likely the definition that you will have on your midterm exam, or if I ask you to give me a definition of sociology, what I would want you to say. So I'm going to give you an in-depth version, and then something that's a little bit more succinct. So the in-depth understanding of sociology with the historical background is that sociology offers a conceptual framework to think about how the increasing flow and embracing of goods, services, money, people, technology, information, and culture shape meanings, identities, and social relationships. So if we think about, if we go all the way back to ancient times, and we think about how people interacted with each other, how people did business with each other, we know from maybe high school history classes or even college history classes that money as we know it, economic resources as we know it, dollar bills, coins, was not always the way in which people did business, or the way in which people understood obtaining and having resources, understood how they could exchange resources and symbols of wealth. And so prior to money, dollars, coins, etc., how did people engage in any type of economic exchange? What was the way in which that occurred? And I'll give you a few seconds just to think about that. You can pause the video here. So if you said a bartering system, you would be correct, right? You said a bartering system. And so generally that would mean that if I'm the leader of a country and we have an enormous amount of sugar, and you are the leader of another country and you have a large amount of iron, right? Then what we would do essentially is if you need sugar and I need iron, then we would just trade. And we would come up with some type of agreement for every however many pounds of sugar I I can get however many bars of iron, right? Whatever we came up with, right? So we would come up with those numbers and then we would exchange. That would be the agreement. And so that is essentially how people did business with each other for a long time. It was just a bartering system, right? So that's where you get this increasing flow and embracing of goods. Now, over time, it kind of got cumbersome, and in some ways extremely difficult to constantly trade goods over time, right? And so with constantly having to trade goods and to bring with you, if you wanted to trade gold, if you wanted to trade iron, if you wanted to trade sugar, spices, materials, you would have to bring, you know, if you're doing this on a large scale, hundreds of elephants, hundreds of camels, you know, thousands of men to conduct these trades. That takes a long time, right? And then you're traveling as the world is expanding and as people's relationships with people are expanding. Now it's more than just trading with the person in the next country or a few countries away. Now, you know, people in West Africa are trading with people from Saudi Arabia, right? And then sometimes even when you have the silk trade, and so you have people from China trading with people from Saudi Arabia on into North Africa, that's a long time. Those journeys can take months, right? With all of these people. And they can sometimes be deadly because people are dying on these travels. And so it became a lot easier. Oh, and then another thing was sometimes if somebody needed something, but there was no goods to exchange, then somebody may say, well, you need sugar from me, but your iron isn't in abundance like it was last year. So I can't give you as much sugar, right? Because your iron is not in abundance as it was before. So then what are we going to do? So if I don't have any more goods to exchange, then what might I use to supplement the goods that you would need? So instead of using goods, I might use services. I might say, hey, I can give you the iron that I have, and then to supplement that, I'll give you 500 of my best men to help build whatever it is you're trying to build, right? To help build up your kingdom. So I'll also provide services in addition to goods. So over time, goods and services were the things that people used to help build their economy and to help build their wealth. Well, over time, again, like I was explaining before, it got to be extremely complicated as the earth is starting to expand, as people's relationships with other people are starting to expand, as wealth is starting to expand, it's becoming even more complicated to participate in this type of bartering and exchange consistently. So with that being said, people, I want to say it was the Chinese, came up with the notion of money, right? And so you have this thing, right? These coins that would supplement or symbolize wealth. Now we know that money is generally backed up by, or at least in the modern times, money is or was backed up by gold. So the amount of gold that you have in your possession should match the amount of money that you have circulating in the economy. So that is, in modern times, and it'll probably be different now, but money is essentially, money in the paper itself is not of value as much as what it represents and what it is backed up by, right? And so even during that time, money or the coins, I don't think they had paper money much at that time, but the coins that represented wealth represented how much you had. And so soon people began to use that to then go and purchase the things that they needed, purchase the sugar, purchase the spices, purchase the silk, purchase the materials, right? And so we talked about that. We also, again, we're talking about flow and embracing of goods and services, talking about economics first, because sociology at its foundation is very much about economics, right? So even when you talk about the early sociological theories, one of the first ones is the conflict theory, which again is based on haves and have-nots, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, people who have money and people who don't. That's essentially what it is. So that's why we're starting with economics, because economics in goods and services and how they are produced and who has access to them and who owns them provides the basis for why we even study how people interact with each other. So we talked about if you don't have goods, then you provide services for people. If you don't have goods, if you don't have services, these people can help you build these people can teach your children. I can give you 300 of my best teachers. But then sometimes if a country is just in a bad place and in a bad shape, they will turn the people and the citizens into indentured servants, or what they called at that time slaves, right? And so these people, they would then trade for goods or materials. Now, again, we call it indentured servitude because it was not like what we understand slavery to be in this day and age. Slavery in the transatlantic slave trade, slavery in the present tense functioned very differently than it did in ancient times. And so in ancient times, typically a person was given, a country was given a group of people for an extended period of time, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, for a purpose. And then that person could either have the option of staying in that country and becoming a citizen and even rising to a certain level of power, or that person could return to their original country. Slavery after the transatlantic slave trade was really one of the first times ever in history, particularly in modern history, where a person could actually be a slave for life. And it was the first time that it was done based on a person's perceived race, ethnicity. It was the first time you had these kind of racialized policies around enslavement, right? And then over time, it started out as indentured servitude, and then eventually Western colonies and Western powers began to say, well, it's a lot cheaper if we just enslave them for the rest of their life, talking about African people, Black people. So over time, the flow and embracing of goods and services and economics turned from being something where people traded money or people trading services to people trading people. Now, as people are interacting with each other, as they are doing this, they're building relationships with each other. And one of the things that they're recognizing is that as we learn more and more about each other, we start to see that, wow, this group, this race, the people in this country do things in a way that is easier, that is much more efficient than the people in my country. We can learn from them, or we can use these products, or they can teach us how to build this, right? And that is what we call technology. Typically, when we think about technology now, we think about iPhones, laptops, computers, whatever, right? Social media, That's what we think about when we think about technology. But technology is just anything that moves society forward. Technology is anything that makes our life easier. So pencils at one point were technology. Fire at one point was technology. Many cars, radio, television sets, right? Washing machines, right? All these things were technology at one point. Right now, we wouldn't necessarily consider it that, but at the time it was, because it was the new thing that made our society run a lot easier than it was at that time. And so that is what people started to learn more about. They began to learn more about each other through these relationships. When they would go to these different countries and when they would trade with each other, then they would talk to each other, more than likely through an interpreter. And they will learn and be able to take some of the technology that they're learning in these other countries back to their own country. They begin to share information, share religions with each other, right? The different religions, different information, science and math, the histories and the stories of where their people came from, they would then share with these people that they're trading. So they initially started these relationships off of economics, off of survival, off of building wealth, off of building their countries. And then as they're doing that, now they're starting to have relationships with each other and understand each other on a deeper level. And so they're exchanging information, knowledge with each other, and then also culture, how your people do things, how your people cook food. Why do these people dress the way they do? Why do the women and the men behave like this in your country versus the women and men behaving like a certain way in our country? I already said food. What is this music, right? What does it mean? What instruments are being played with this music? Well, let me show you the music that comes from my country. And so different aspects of culture are now beginning to exchange hands as with this economic base, with the reason again for the relationship being economics, but then also learning from each other. And so what this starts to do is this starts to shape meaning. It starts to shape what people mean, what culture means. The more you understand something, the more you understand people, then what they mean and how they relate or how they contribute to the overall human condition, how they contribute to the wider world in which we live and in which we work, starts to take on a different meaning. And then especially if you begin to befriend it, right? If this culture or country becomes an ally, right? Then this takes on a totally different meaning, especially if people from your country begin to intermarry with people from this other country. Now your culture takes on an entirely different meaning. Now you have a mixture of languages. Now you have a mixture of religions and gods, and different things are occurring. So all of this interrelationship is shaping meaning. It's also shaping identity, because as you begin to learn more about another culture or another group, as one of these countries begins to learn more about one group, then they start to understand how unique their identity is and their country is. If you've never been outside of your country or outside of your state or outside of your city, then you don't know how unique you are, right? And you might even think that the whole world functions like you do, or thinks like you do, or everyone behaves like you do, until you actually go out into the world and you travel. That's why some people say one of the best things you can do and one of the best things that you can give to a person is travel. And when people travel and see the differences and the beauty in human relationships and humanity and how people act and behave and run their countries and their societies and their families and different things, then we can start to appreciate each other, and we can even appreciate ourselves. We can learn from them, or if we see something that we don't necessarily agree with, then we can become more appreciative of the things that we have or the way that we do things. And then sometimes there's no right or wrong way, it's just different. These people do it one way and we do it another way. It's not bad or good, it's not wrong or right. Sometimes it's just different. Now, there are some things that are bad and good. There are some things that other countries and other people do that is that can be seen as immoral, or can be seen as moral or good. And there are things that are done in this country among people who are considered U.S. citizens that can be immoral. And then there are some things that can be good, right? So we learn and grow and see things when we travel. So you have meanings, you have identities, and then overall, this affects what we call social relationships, interrelationships, how people begin to understand and appreciate and have economic relationships, political relationships, allies with each other, learn from each other, appreciate each other. All these things are occurring, and a lot of it is built off of the things that we just talked about. So starting with the economics, then the technology and information, learning, educating each other, and then allowing those cultural our cultural knowledge and our cultural understandings of each other to begin to then shape our meanings, their identity, those people's identities, our identities, what we call endogamy and exogamy. And then that then, of course, kind of overall defines what we consider in sociology are social relationships. So it's a very long explanation of sociology. Now, more succinct definition would be the second one on this slide, which is the idea that sociology is the scientific study of human activity and the social forces that influence or pressure people to behave, respond, or think in certain ways, right? So sociology is a science. It follows the scientific process, right? It follows the scientific method where you have a problem and a hypothesis and materials and procedures and then experiment and results and conclusion, forward work. So sociology follows that. But instead of looking at how it's done when we look at the hard sciences, like in biology or human anatomy or something like that, we just look at people, right? And we look at people, and then we look at the social, that's the key phrase here, the social forces. The social forces, the things that are happening outside of a person in society that is pressuring or influencing or encouraging people to think in a certain way, to behave in a certain way, to respond in a certain way. These are the things that we call social forces, okay? And social forces is essentially anything that humans create that influence behavior, that influence the way you respond to things and why you respond to things in a certain way. Social forces are anything that affects your thought patterns, why you think a certain way. And not just patterns of thought for one person, but patterns of thought for a larger group of people, typically people with a similar, maybe racial background, gender background, whatever that social location may be, regional background, et cetera, or even race or ethnicity, or citizen or country of belonging, right? Wherever it is that you were born, right? Your place of nativity. So social forces mixing with human activity to describe how people behave, how people think, how people respond. That is the overall idea of sociology. And then when we talk about human activity, when we say we're studying human activity, what we're studying is how people work, how people make, eat food, how people get food, right? How people compete for scholarships, right? Competing for resources, how people fall in love, what people do with love, what does love mean? All of these things are human activities. Winning at something, losing at something, consuming something. All of these things are human activities that sociologists look at, right? Look at and study and ask questions about, right? To get a clearer understanding of life's meanings, of a society's meanings, of a society's identities, and then learning and growing from that so that then we can say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is something that we may want to look deeper into, or we may want to pass a policy that can either advance this or stop this if it is contributing to a certain level of inequality, right? So these are the things that sociologists do and sociologists look at. All right, so if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. And now we will go on to talk about the sociological imagination. So the sociological imagination was a concept that was formulated by a gentleman by the name of C. Wright Mills. I want to say it was in like the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, the book Sociological Imagination came out. And the sociological imagination essentially is a mindset that allows people to see social forces shape one's life story or biography, right? So sociological imagination first is a certain type of a mindset. And that is the mindset, if you read the syllabus and if you read the course description and you read further there, you would see that I talk about activating or expanding our sociological imagination, how we view things, how we see the world. I don't know if any of you are comedians or look at comedians or study comedians or study comedy, and there are a lot of people out there that are funny. You've probably been funny in certain settings or made jokes or saw things in a certain way and made a joke about it and your friends laughed, your family laughed. And that's good. A lot of people can be funny, but to be a really good comedian, right? To be a comedian that is very successful, those comedians typically have a certain type of mindset and they can see the funny in situations that typically may not be funny or most people may gloss over. And they'll see something and start laughing in their head, or they'll see a joke and another person may say, well, why are you laughing on it? That wasn't funny. But then they're able to make a joke out of it, present it in this comedic format and make you laugh and entertain you. So what they say is that comedians oftentimes have a comedic eye. They have this certain type of mindset or the way in which they look at the world. Sociologists also have the same thing, right? They have what we call sociological imagination. It's a sociological eye. It's the way in which we're able to see how things are occurring that other people may not be able to see based on our training. But then also sometimes it might just be intrinsic. It might just be something that is of interest to you, even if you're not a sociology major. But after you take this class and realize, oh, I've been asking these questions for a long time. I've been seeing this for a long time. Maybe you might want to consider sociology as a career. And it is a very good career, depending on where you go. And, you can take it into law, you can take it into politics, you can take it into, the medical field, anywhere, right? Ph.D. and be a professor, researcher, whatever you want to do, right? So many different ways, but you might find out that you have a sociological imagination and you've had it for a while, you just didn't realize it or you didn't know it, right? And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to activate that for those who don't have it. For those who do have it, we're just going to expand it and enhance it and see if that's something, you might be interested in. So with that being said, let's look at the two elements of the sociological imagination. One of the elements is social forces. We've already talked about what that is. Anything that humans create that influence patterns, thought patterns, behavior, responses, etc. So we have social forces. And then the next element of sociological imagination is one's life story or biography. So my question to you, how many of you read, or for some people who may not like to read, anything outside of school, watch biographies or biopics? How many of you like to read or read biographies or watch biopics? And if so, what are some of your favorite ones? So just think about maybe a biopic that you watched, maybe in the movies or, well, when the movies was open, or maybe on television, maybe even a documentary that you've watched, or maybe the last one that you've read. So you can think about that. I'm trying to think, is there one here in my library? This is just one of my libraries. Oh, this is a good one. The other Westmore. This is a really good bio. Let's see. This is actually one that you'll be reading this semester, Becoming by Michelle Obama. So if you didn't look at your course schedule, you'll be reading that book. But me, I have a lot of biographies because I love, love, love biographies. I love reading. What's going on with my camera? Okay. I love reading about people. I love knowing the stories of people. So I read a lot of biographies. I have read a lot of biographies. And I also watch a lot of them as well. So the last one I watched was probably King Richard. Some of you may have heard about it. It's the story of Richard Williams, Venus and Serena, the tennis superstars, their father. And it kind of talks about their father's life with them. But he has a book, there's actually right up there, a book called Black and White, The Way I See It, which is the story of his entire life. And outside of this person's biography, which is my favorite biography, Malcolm X, Richard Williams is my second favorite biography. His life is incredible. So if you like biographies, if you want to read them, his is amazing. It's not that expensive because I don't know if a lot of people know about it, but it's really, really, really good. It has nothing on them. I mean, there's nothing on the movie. It's way, way better than the movie. And the movie was really good. Anyway, I said all that to say that biographies are the study of a person's life, right? So you're thinking about your a biography or a biopic that you like, right? I don't know, it could be some of my favorite ones. Again, I talked about King Richard or Richard Williams, or maybe if you like the group Queen. I really like the group Queen, so I love Bohemian Rhapsody. That was another one that was really, really cool. I really love that movie. All these different people have interesting lives. That's why books are written about them. That's why movies are written about them, because they have these very interesting lives. But also, generally, there's something else that's going on outside of their life story that is making their story much more interesting. So if you think about, let's go with Queen, right? Let's go with Bohemian Rhapsody. I know most of you are probably born after the 2000s. So you may or may not be familiar with Queen. Queen, famous rock group from the 70s and the 80s. A lot of very famous songs that you probably heard, but maybe you just didn't know that they were from Queen, were from them. So let's go with Queen, for example. Now, Queen, the lead singer of Queen was a gentleman by the name of Freddie Mercury, right? Freddie Mercury, extremely talented gentleman, super talented, right? And you see the story of how this kind of group, they didn't really come from poverty, more middle class, right? Took their talent for music, talent for singing, and their bravery to push the limits of rock, push the limits of all of these different elements of music, and then adding them together to create just this amazing sound, and made some of the biggest stadium anthems of the 20th century, right? But one thing about Freddie Mercury, you realize, and if you just know the story of Freddie Mercury, he was bisexual because he was in love with a woman, but a lot of his sexual activities were with men. But then also you see in the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, skip over this part, whatever. The movie, he contracts HIV and AIDS, and he eventually gets full-blown AIDS, and he dies, I want to say in the late 80s, early 90s, from HIV and AIDS, from complications from AIDS. And what is interesting about the film is not just his story, but the fact that it was set during the height of the AIDS epidemic. So a lot of people didn't understand that. A lot of people, there was a time where homophobia was extremely big and it was politicized during that time. And so understanding what life was like for a gay person in the 1980s and at the height of the AIDS epidemic, in addition to trying to figure out how this guy, Freddie Mercury, is navigating his life through this time period, you see the intersection of the social forces of homophobia, HIV and AIDS epidemic, all of that happening in the 1980s, and then his life story of Freddie Mercury. And looking at how these things intersect is what we call the sociological imagination. Had Freddie Mercury been born instead of in the 60s, I think he was born in the 60s, had he not been born then in 1960, maybe if he was born in 1860, or maybe if he was born in 1995, his life story could have been totally different. But because he was born during a certain time with certain social forces that influenced his behavior, made him also not be as vocal about his sexuality, not be as vocal about the fact that he had HIV and AIDS. He was born and he came up during a certain time that affected his thoughts. It affected the way he behaved. It affected his relationships, right? It affected his how he understood his sexuality. It affected how he loved, what he thought love was. So all of these things are what we call the sociological, or being able to see these things and pick it apart and analyze it is what we call the sociological imagination. Seeing how people's social forces and what's happening around a certain time intersect with the person's life story. So even if you look at your own, which you will later on in your race body essay, look at your life, where you've been, what you've been through, the different things that you've experienced, and how being born when you were has helped to shape that, right? The fact that you kind of came up during the era of Me Too, during the era of Black Lives Matter, during the era of COVID, all of these things that are happening during the time that you are alive has shaped you. Well, I hope it's shaping you. I hope it's affecting the way you see the world, hopefully affecting you in a positive way. But all of these things influence you. Had you been born 2 decades or 3 decades before, or 3 decades later, you could be a totally different person. So that's what we do when we're talking about the sociological imagination. And so again, going back to social forces are these human creations that affect how we respond to different things. So for example, if you look at Freddie Mercury being born or coming up during the time of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, during the time of extreme homonegativity, what some people call homophobia. He didn't create homonegativity, what some people call homophobia. He didn't create the HIV and AIDS epidemic. That wasn't what he created. Granted, it was something that human beings created, because human beings create hate, right? Some people, there are, theories, that say epidemics are created by human beings, right? Pandemics, COVID, what was patient zero? Some people have some hypotheses, other people have other hypotheses. But essentially, especially when you're talking about hatred or inequality, there's something that's created by human beings. So this is what we call social forces. But the people that are affected by it may not have necessarily had anything to do with it. Freddie Mercury didn't have anything to do with homophobia, homonegativity, or the HIV and AIDS epidemic in its creation, but he was affected by it, right? So even if we look at like the smartphone is a social force. We all have smartphones. And if I would ask you, what do you use your smartphone for? You would say everything. You might be on your smartphone right now listening to this. You may have done some banking. You may have moved some money around. You may have done some business. You may have enrolled in classes. You could be doing a lot of things with your smartphone. But did you create the smartphone? Were you in the labs creating it, building it, putting together the formula for the smartphone? Probably not. Now, you could have provided some feedback saying, oh, this could be done better. Sure. But were you actually hands-on in creating the smartphone? More, probably not. But it affects the way you live. We're all influenced and it has shaped our lives. And we could think of a lot of different examples. And I want you to think of some examples of social forces. Whether you're talking about religion, social force, right? Definitely a social force. Music, social force. So there's a lot of things that are social forces that affect the way we look at each other and the way in which we, how we move and the different things that influence our lives. Also, the sociological imagination is also the quality of mind that helps people think about what is going on in the world and what may be happening with them on a personal level. So when you begin to understand your sociological imagination and when it is activated, you start to understand yourself a little better. You start to say, oh, this happened and that happened to me and now, oh, that makes more sense. Oh, now I understand my family a little bit better. I understand why they may have said this or did that. I know I did when I, went to college. And then you can understand the world around you a little bit better. I think I said this on the first day of class intro lecture video, but one of the best responses I received from a student after they took one of my classes was that they had a better understanding of everything that was happening around them, the protests, the politics, everything that was happening. They felt so much more equipped and empowered to have discussions with their parents and their friends and people on social media about it from taking my class. And I felt I felt humbled and I was appreciative that I could be a vessel to be used to help empower this person. And that's what the sociological imagination does. It allows you to have a better understanding of yourself and the world around you. Another thing that the sociological imagination does is it allows us to explore the differences between troubles and issues. So you have something called troubles, which are a person's individual shortcomings, and issues, which are larger social problems that are occurring that don't just affect an individual person, but groups of people. So for example, if I came to your class, and I said, hey, I can't find a job, you might say, well, maybe you're not looking in the right place. How strong is your resume? What did you major in? Did you go to college? Did you graduate high school? Maybe you're not applying in the right industry. Maybe you are going for jobs that you're overqualified for or underqualified for. And all of those are good responses. If I came to you and said, I personally couldn't find a job. Now, if I came to you with 50 people, 49 people who look just like me, right? Black, male, and we all had various educational degrees from graduating high school all the way up to terminal degrees. If we all came from different class backgrounds, some of us came from poor, middle class, upper middle class, right? And we all, so we're different in some ways, but we're the same, maybe in just our physical appearance, maybe in just race and gender. And we all said, hey, we can't find jobs. Then you might say, oh, that's not just a trouble. The first one was a trouble because maybe I was doing something wrong. This might be an issue. And what kind of issue is it? It's probably a racial and a gendered issue. There could be some discrimination happening wherever we are that is stopping 50 people from being able to get a job. There could be some discrimination there. This could be a larger social issue. Let's look into that. So that's the difference between troubles and issues. And people who possess a sociological imagination can have a better understanding of troubles and issues and history and biography. And so all of these different things are, again, activated by our sociological imagination. And that then comes out of the foundation for understanding sociology and the scientific study of human behavior. So let us go to, just to give a quick kind of history of sociology and where it comes from. So so prior to, let's say, maybe like the 1830s, I guess, the United States was very much an agrarian society, right? Society based off of farming. You had politicians, you had rich people, but for the most part, everybody was just kind of on their own. It's a very fragmented society. Everybody had their own kind of, way in which they did things. More than likely, if you lived on a farm, I think I read in the history book once, most people didn't travel more than 12 miles away from their home in their entire life. Right? In their entire life. So life was pretty compact and it was pretty guarded. However, what began to change this was the Industrial Revolution. Once we begin to, in technology, once we begin to have easier ways of farming, easier ways of doing business, easier ways for having and making and keeping a job. And once our society began to transform from an agrarian society to a mechanized society, which is a society that is based off of machines, and there became less and less farmland and became more and more factories, you start to see a huge shift in human behavior. And this is what we call the Industrial Revolution. And it didn't just happen in the United States. This was happening in the West in general, especially in England. So now you're seeing more factories. Now you're seeing more big urban cities. You might have seen the images or the pictures, these big factories with the big pipes and the big smoke coming out of the pipe. Yeah, all of that is kind of reminiscent of the Industrial Revolution. If you've ever read, not Huck Finn, what was the one about the boy? Like, was it Thomas Sawyer? I think it was Thomas Sawyer, one of those books, right? So all of that has to do with the Industrial Revolution. And it was at this time that economists, historians were looking at the way in which people were behaving, and they're saying this is different, particularly the families. Because now men are not necessarily working on farms anymore. Now they're working in factories. Now they're being taken away from their households and their families for 9, 10, 11, 12 hours at a time. Well, how is that affecting the wife? What does that mean for women's positions in the home? How is that affecting the kids? How is that affecting how many kids a person has? If this was my social problems class or my intro class, I would probably say that children went from being an asset to a liability. In an agrarian society, the more kids you had, the better. Why? Free labor. As soon as they get old enough, they can get out and work. It can help you. They're making money. In a mechanized society, in this industrial revolution, they're a liability because they can't work in the factories. They're too young, they're too little. So all they're doing is just eating your food. So all they're doing is taking and taking and taking, and then they're doing that for 18 years, maybe 16 to 18 years before they can finally now contribute to the household. So they go from being an asset to a liability. Well, sociologists are looking at that. That means that the family structure is going to go from here in terms of people to here. That's why nowadays you don't have you oftentimes don't have people having 6, 7, 8 children like they did in the past. That wasn't uncommon in an agrarian society, but now if a couple has more than 2 or 3 children, then church folks are saying, whoa, y'all got a lot of kids, right? So these aren't sociologists, actually. A lot of them are political scientists and philosophers and economists like Marx are looking at this and they're saying, there's something here. There's something here. And we need to study why people are behaving the way they are, why the family structure is changing, how this increase in industry, and ultimately this large increase in wealth, some of the biggest wealth disparities ever, we see during the height of the Industrial Revolution, because now you see some of the richest people in the world able to monopolize certain markets and then capitalize on it over and over and over and over and over again. Now you start to see the growth of your Vanderbilts and your Rockefellers and your Carnegies. Still to this day, some of the richest people ever in history. And we're kind of seeing it again with your Elon Musks and your Jeff Bezos, people who corner certain markets, right? So wealth inequality was huge and is now affecting the way people are behaving. And there's certain philosophers and economists that are saying we need to look at that. But they're saying we don't need to just look at it and then make false judgments or come up with hypothetical ideas around why these things are occurring. No, we need to take these social problems that we're seeing and put it through the scientific method. And that's how they created the discipline of sociology. Auguste Comte, first one. We're going to talk about him in the next lecture. Right? Came up with the phrase sociology, the study of society, the study of people and human behavior. Right? And so essentially, this discipline emerged as a way for people to understand why people were behaving the way they were during the Industrial Revolution and how society was transforming and changing and how people were interacting with each other. One of the first things they looked at was the change in the way goods and services were produced. Again, no more coming from the ground as much. Now everything is off of machines. What is that doing to people, to health, to life, to the lifespan, to the family structure? Transforming elements of work. Now work takes you away from home as opposed to your work being in the home on the farm. What does that mean? Changing the ideas of space and time. Before, if I wanted to go from Florida to Oklahoma, it may take 3 months. Now, with the ideas of space and time changing, with the introduction of the railroad and the train, now it might take 3 to 5 days. And so all of these things are important when we're talking about what does this mean for human behavior? What does this mean for human interaction? Also, how is this Industrial Revolution expanding colonial powers? Somebody's owning all of these things politically and economically there are countries, there are powers that are participating and benefiting from all of these big businesses, all of this steel, all of this coal, all of this oil. Somebody's benefiting from this. And so now we're seeing the rise of colonial powers. And then you start to see it in the latter part of the 19th century when these colonial powers start to politically, and economically, and geographically take over and exploit India, Saudi Arabia, all of sub-Saharan, almost all of sub-Saharan Africa. And you see this rise of capitalism. And capitalism then becomes the way of the world for a long time. All right. And so with this rise of capitalism, this is when you start to see some of the earliest sociological theories, particularly the conflict theory, which challenges capitalism and then becomes the foundation for the way of life and the economic system that would eventually battle capitalism during a large part of the 20th century, which would be communism, socialism, right? And so then you see that battle happening throughout the 20th century, often referred to as the American century. So yes, that is where sociology comes from. So real quick, for the next few minutes, we're just gonna do a quick activity just to show this sociological imagination thing at work. So what I would like for you to do is I want you to click on this link, or you can copy and paste it into a browser. And actually, you really don't even have to do that necessarily. We could actually just, you don't even have to click on it, because I'll end up asking you the questions anyway. So, but if you want to, you can, and you could just kind of follow along. So one thing that all of us have in common, one thing that all of us do, is we all go to the bathroom, right? All of us go to the bathroom. Particularly, and this activity is kind of gendered because these rules are usually related to men and how men interact in the bathroom. So let's say, for example, you have a gentleman that wants to go to the bathroom. And there's 3 urinals. 1, 2, 3. Right? And this gentleman needs to go to the bathroom. Which one is the gentleman going to use? Is he going to use that one closest to the door? Is he going to use the middle one? Or is he going to use the one that is all the way to the end? Which one do you think? All right. The traditional correct answer would be the one at the end. And when you ask a man why he chooses that one, these are some of the responses that you will get. It is a part of the culture of American men's restrooms. Men don't like to give the impression that they're looking at or initiating contact with other men. And then some men feel that they're supposed to come in, stare at the wall, do their business, and leave. Actually, in Men's Health, a lot of men report saying that they feel that the one closest to the door is the one with the most bacteria, because that's the one that everybody uses. And so generally they go to use the one furthest from the door because that's the one that has the least amount of bacteria. But according to Men's Health, actually, the one furthest from the door is the one that has the most bacteria. It's the one that's the least sanitary. And why is that? Because that's the one that most people use. Because they think the one that's closest to the door is the one that is the dirtiest. So Most of you probably said the one furthest away, and you were right. Now let's look at another scenario. Let's say you have a gentleman who walks into the bathroom. You have a urinal here, urinal here, urinal here. And there's somebody using that one further from the door. So now you just have these two. Which one is he going to use? If you said the one closest to the door, which leaves the one in the middle vacant, you're correct. Oftentimes, men will put space, a urinal, between the two. And why is that? Some of the reasons we said before. Men want their privacy. They don't want to be perceived as looking at another man when they're using the bathroom. Right? Now, let's say, last scenario. Let's say man walks into the bathroom. Urinal here, urinal here, urinal here. Someone's using that last urinal and someone using that first urinal. So now there's this urinal right here in the middle that's available. What does he do? Well, some people might go ahead and use it. A lot of people, according to research, will wait until one of those other urinals are available and then go to use the other urinal. But the question is, well, why would somebody do that? Why, if they really have to use the bathroom, why would they inconvenience themselves even more by waiting when there's clearly a urinal available to them? Why would they put their bladder and their health at risk, because it is not healthy for a person to hold their urine over a long period of time? It's not a healthy way of doing things, right? So why would a person do that? Why would a person break biological rules to follow social rules? That goes to show you how powerful sociology is. And the social rules don't make any sense. Another thing is that we all probably said a lot of the same answers. Every time I've done this exercise in person, pretty much everybody said the same answers. And we all may be from various places, grew up in various places. We don't know each other. Right now, we're not even in the same classroom, but we all knew the answers. Where did these answers come from? Did somebody give you a book and you had to learn and read bathroom etiquette? Was it trial and error? Do you actually remember when somebody told you the rules for the bathroom? No. More than likely not. More than likely you just know. You don't know how you know, you just know. That's called social forces. Society influencing how you think, how you behave. Even if the way we think and behave makes no sense when we really think about it. When we put on our sociological imagination, we're like, that doesn't even make sense. So this flushing out activity is just a way for us to see how powerful sociology, how powerful our social forces really are. That it could cause us to make certain decisions that may not even make sense, but we do it anyway, and may still continue to do. They're just something that's just a part of our everyday life. And this is why studying this stuff is very important. So we can see how we're doing things that may be right, and may be good, but then also we can look at how we're doing some things that may not be good and what we can do to be better.
Okay, so really quickly, I forgot to insert your assignments. So I'll do that here. I'm actually going to do that here, and then I'll insert it into the video later. So quiz 1, you actually have a quiz on the sociological imagination. Quiz 1, you have a quiz available on May 20th. It will cover the lecture notes and reading from the sociological imagination. So to prepare for the quiz, make sure you read the reading sociological imagination, and you pay attention to the notes on the sociological imagination. The quiz will be available on May 20th, Friday. It will be 5 to 10 questions related to the reading. The questions to the quiz will be available under modules, reading quizzes, entitled Quiz 1, Sociological Imagination, at midnight on Friday, May 20th. You will have 24 hours until 11:59 p.m. on May 20th on Friday to complete the quiz. You can do it many different ways. You can, on a separate Microsoft Word document, you can record the answers to the questions. You will go to the assignments link, and you will click on reading quizzes and find the portal that says Quiz 1 Sociological Imagination, and you can upload the answers there. Or you can just download the actual quiz and then answer it on the quiz, however you want to do it. No submissions after the deadline will be graded under any circumstances. So if you have questions, reach out to me during my office hours. Remember, the deadline for the quiz will be 11:59 p.m. on Friday, May 20th. All right. So that is that.
So that is the end of our sociological imagination lecture. The other lecture you have for this week is the theory and methods. So you can go ahead and go study that and listen to that and look at the slides and take notes. So I hope you have a great day, great week, great weekend. See you in office hours. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.